Making headlines for this week of February 13th. Ukraine ceasefire take 2. Latest agreement to bring end to violence by Sunday. European poker. EU leaders underestimate new Greek players as their bluff may have been called. HSBC scandal. ICIJ group exposes new crimes attributed to one of the world's largest banks. And how sweet it is. Big sugar companies exposed for their funding and support of nutritional research.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. The geopolitical game of chess continues this week in both Ukraine and Greece, and this week we start with developments unfolding in Ukraine. Reports are now coming out that peace negotiations involving Russia, France, Germany, and Ukraine have come out to an outcome that appears to be positive by most reports. Indications show that an agreement, at least in principle, has been reached. Russian President Vladimir Putin has made the announcement that as of 12 a.m. on February 15th, a new ceasefire agreement will be enforced in Ukraine. We have more with this report from RT.
This wasn't the best night of my life, but in my view, it is a good morning. Despite all the difficulties of the talks process, we were able to agree on the most important things. By the way, I believe the talks lasted so long because Kiev authorities unfortunately still refuse to have direct contact with representatives of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic. Although these republics haven't been recognized yet, we should act according to the present realities. If all parties want to agree on building long-term relations, they should have direct contact. Well, we had to work within the existing context, and in my view, we managed to agree on many things. Firstly, we have agreed on ceasefire as of the 15th of February 2015, 12 a.m. local time. The second point, which I see as crucial, is heavy weapons being withdrawn from today's line of contact for Ukrainian armed forces and from the line set up by the Minsk Agreement of September 19, 2014 for the Donbass militias. Then there were a range of issues related to long-term political settlement consisting of several points. Firstly, constitutional reform that should take into consideration the legitimate rights of people living in Donbass. There were also border issues in coordination with the Donbass militias, humanitarian issues, and the implementation of the previously adopted law on special status of these territories, Donetsk and Lugansk. Finally, there were a whole range of economic and humanitarian issues. We expect that all the parties will show restraint in the nearest time until the complete ceasefire. Initially, the problem there was that representatives of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics claimed that in response to aggressive actions of Kiev authorities, they not only held back the Kiev forces, but also managed to mount an offensive and encircled a large group of 6,000 to 8,000 servicemen. They believe that this group will lay down arms and cease resistance. However, we call on both sides to exercise restraint and make sure that the separation of troops goes smoothly to avoid any further unnecessary bloodshed and casualties. The Ukrainian leadership, however, believes no troops have been encircled and hopes everything will run quite smoothly. Initially, I had my doubts, which I'm ready to share with you. Logically speaking, if indeed the troops have been encircled, they will try to break free, while those outside the encirclement will try to clear a passage for their fellow servicemen to escape. President Poroshenko and I agreed to ask our military experts to establish the real status quo on the ground. In addition, we will try and work out ways to verify the implementation of these decisions by both sides. I'd like to renew my appeal to both conflicting parties to cease the bloodshed as soon as possible and launch a genuine political process towards a lasting political settlement. The first document has just been signed by the Minsk Contact Group. It's called Package of Measures for the Implementation of the Minsk Agreement. The second one, which doesn't require signing, is a statement by the President of France, President of Ukraine, yours truly, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. It says that we support this process. Thank you for your attention.
According to another RT article, the 13-point deal has been reported as follows. 1. A comprehensive ceasefire in eastern Ukraine coming into effect at midnight on February 15th. 2. A pullout of heavy weapons. The pullout is to be completed by March 1st. 3. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, will use its drone fleet and monitors on the ground as well as satellite images and radar data to ensure that both parties stick to the deal. 4. Kiev and the rebels will negotiate the terms for future local elections in the rebel-held areas, which would bring them back into Ukraine's legal framework. Kiev would adopt legislation on self-governance that would be acceptable for the self-proclaimed republics. 5. Kiev will declare a general amnesty for the rebels. 6. An exchange of all prisoners must be completed by the 5th day after full disengagement. That's in 19 days if the weapons pullback takes the full time provided for by the deal. 7. Humanitarian aid convoys will be allowed full access to the needy in the war-affected areas. An international monitoring mechanism will be provided. 8. Kiev will restore economic ties, social payments, and banking services in the dissenting areas, which it cut earlier in response to the elections held by the self-proclaimed republics. Their respective governments will resume taxation and payment for utilities. This provision is subject for further negotiation. 9. After the local elections are held in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, Kiev is to restore control over their borders with Russia. The transition may take time, which would be needed for a comprehensive constitutional reform in Ukraine. 10. All foreign troops, heavy weapons, and mercenaries are to be withdrawn from Ukraine. Illegally armed groups would be disarmed, but local authorities in Donetsk and Luhansk would be allowed to have legal militia units. 11. Kiev will implement comprehensive constitutional reform by the end of the year, which would decentralize the Ukrainian political system and give privileges to Donetsk and Lugansk. The privileges include language self-determination, the freedom to appoint prosecutors and judges, and to establish economic ties with Russia. 12. The OSCE's election monitors are to see that local elections in the self-proclaimed republics are up to international standards. The exact procedure for the elections is subject to further negotiations. And number 13, talks between the contact group will be intensified in various ways. The RT article quotes Ukrainian President Poroshenko as saying that the main thing achieved is that from Saturday into Sunday there should be declared without any conditions at all a general ceasefire. A BBC article on February 12th reports that the separatists gave the agreement a cautious welcome. In Luhansk, rebel leader Igor Plotnitsky said, "We hope that thanks to our efforts today, Ukraine will change and stop firing at civilians, hospitals, and socially important facilities." But Donetsk separatist leader Alexander Zakharchenko said Kiev would be to blame if the ceasefire collapsed and warned that there would be no meetings and no new agreements. This is the second ceasefire agreement to be negotiated. Last September, another agreement was put into place, but fell apart due to mistrust on both sides. The BBC article offers a small table of information in its article comparing the two ceasefire agreements for any wishing to view this. The article or the link will be in the show summary. RT has reported cautious optimism from many leaders around Europe in a separate article dated on the 12th. The article noted the following. German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier responded in a similar vein, saying that while the summit was not exactly a breakthrough, it should steer everyone away from the path of escalation in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. The most important thing is that Moscow and Kiev agreed on a ceasefire. We strengthened the Minsk Accords of last September, Steinmeier said in a statement. For some, this will not be enough. We also would have wished for more, but this is what the presidents of Ukraine and Russia could agree on. French President François Hollande was more upbeat, calling the deal a comprehensive political solution, which would engender serious hope, even if everything is not done. President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, also tweeted that Thursday's agreement gives hope in the run-up to an informal meeting of the members of the European Council on Thursday. Hope is important, essential, but not enough. Real test is respect of ceasefire on the ground in Ukraine, he wrote. The European Council, the unelected body that is reported to be the governing body that has the real decision-making power within the EU, has been meeting in Brussels, and various leaders in attendance have offered anything from guarded optimism to minor criticism of Putin. UK Prime Minister David Cameron, although welcoming the second agreement, was very firm in saying that Putin has to know sanctions will remain in place without concrete progress on the ground. In a late developing scenario related to this story, RT is reporting on the 13th that Ukraine's right sector leader, Dmitry Yarosh, said his radical movement rejects the Minsk peace deal and that their paramilitary units in eastern Ukraine will continue active fighting according to their own plans. The notorious ultra-nationalist leader published a statement on his Facebook page on Friday saying that his radical right sector movement doesn't recognize the peace deal, signed by the so-called contact group on Thursday and agreed upon by Ukraine, France, Germany, and Russia after the 16-hour marathon talks. Yarosh claimed that any agreement with the Eastern militia, whom he calls terrorists, has no legal force. In his statement, Yarosh claimed that the Minsk deal is contrary to Ukraine's constitution, so Ukrainian citizens are not obliged to abide by it. Thus, if the army receives orders to cease military activity and withdraw heavy weaponry from the eastern regions, the right sector paramilitaries, who are also fighting there, reserve the right to continue the war, he said. It has been reported recently that English-speaking soldiers wearing Ukrainian military outfits have been serving within Ukraine borders, but it is unclear at this time if this group is truly interested in the sovereignty of their region or whether they are a sponsored group by the Western cabal to continue to stir up trouble and thus allow the illusion of Russia being the aggressor to continue. A second development to this story also came late in the day of the 13th, just before airtime. Another RT article is reporting that MPs, members of parliament in Kiev, hoodwinked a U.S. senator, presenting his office with photos of columns of Russian military hardware allegedly roaming Ukrainian territory. The photos turned out to have been taken during the conflict in South Ossetia back in 2008. The photos were presented to the Armed Services Committee from a delegation from Ukraine in December, told the Washington Free Beacon Senator Jim Inhofe's communication director, Donnell Harder. The Americans planned to publish the photos with credits to the Ukrainian MPs, and they were fine with that, the spokesperson said. Yet, after thorough checking, images of the Russian convoys turned out to be taken years ago in 2008 during the Georgian South Ossetian War. Unfortunately, although Harder acknowledged that the photos were fake, Harder still held the position that there is, allegedly, plenty of evidence to support Russian incursion into Ukraine, evidence that the U.S. still has not presented to the world. New listeners to CVN can take this story for what it is, a presentation of an outcome that is specifically geared to one particular event. Most listeners, being more familiar with the bigger picture, may be looking to tie these events into other events that have been taking place recently, such as secret meetings between Putin, Merkel, and Hollande before the peace meeting in Minsk. The questions are beginning to form as to what is going on behind the scenes that has not yet been revealed to the people of the world. Certain events may be taking place so that people of the world do not get too overwhelmed with changes that are taking place in the geopolitical and geoeconomic structures of our world. It has been rumored that one of the reasons for the secret meeting between France, Germany, and Russia last week was to begin laying the framework for France and Germany to possibly leave NATO and the Cabal alliance and enter into a more formal defense and economic relationship with Russia under the BRICS agreement. Any rumored agreement could also change the balance of power within the UN Security Council, whose 5 permanent members are the US, France, Britain, Russia, and China. It is becoming increasingly important to scrutinize and question everything you see and hear in journalism at this time. Formulate your own questions and guide yourself towards information that will help you determine what is truth for you in this moment. A lot of information is being revealed, and there are connections and interconnections that many will not know or understand at first. It will take time to digest what is now unfolding, but wherever possible, do your best to hold the energies of an outcome that is for peace and for the highest good of all and our planet at this time. In other geopolitical news, it may be possible for Western and European leaders to maintain their poker faces when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, but it could be argued that it is harder for them to keep the same straight face when the financial system they have created and perpetuated for the enslavement of humanity to debt and fear is breaking down and being exposed publicly before their very eyes, with compliments from the new government of Greece. A couple of new poker players have entered the game, and they both seem to share a strong sense of that game and what it takes to call the bluff of people who have been playing this game for a lot longer. These 2 new players are Greek Premier Alexis Tsipras and Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. Tsipras has now made his first address to the Greek Parliament. With more on this story, here is Sharmini Piris of the Real News Network.
In his first major parliament speech, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras of Greece vowed and honored anti-austerity pledges made to voters that ushered him and his party Syriza into power. To discuss all of this, I'm joined by Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri is joining us from London, Ontario, and he's a partner with the Canadian law firm Siskins, where he heads the firm's securities class action practice. So, Dimitri, what did the new Prime Minister have to say in his first big speech in Parliament?
Well, the background to the speech is, of course, that there is effectively a standoff between the positions of the new government and the Troika. The austerity bloc is insisting upon full or essentially full compliance with the program of austerity measures that the prior government agreed to as a condition of the so-called bailout of Greece, whereas the government of Tsipras is insisting that the austerity program be substantially relaxed and that further loans to Greece not be conditioned upon full or near full compliance with that program. So that's the background, and very little, if any, significant headway has been made between these 2 opposing sides since the government was elected. And today, Tsipras stood up in Parliament, and his essential message was that we don't have the right to force compliance with the program on the Greek people at this stage. Our mandate was to do precisely the opposite, and that means to substantially relax, not necessarily entirely abandon the program, but substantially relax the program and in particular protect the most vulnerable members of Greek society. And so then he laid out a series of measures that he felt and his colleagues within the new government felt would accomplish precisely that. They included increasing the exemption on income that is not subject to tax, so that those who are the lowest income earners in the country wouldn't have to pay income tax or would pay much less income tax. A gradual restoration of the minimum wage to a level where it was at a few years ago when the austerity program began. It would be approximately 750, I think, or somewhat more than that, euros a month at the end of the gradual escalation of the minimum wage. He talked about eliminating a property tax that was particularly punitive and hard on poor members of society, the restoration of electricity to those who had been penalized for their inability to pay certain property taxes. He also talked importantly about collection of taxes that are due from those who have evaded their tax obligations in Greece. According to the government, there are 7 billion euros of tax liabilities owed by tax evaders that they've identified, and the government says that some 2.5 billion euros is available for immediate collection.
The speech was obviously well received by parliamentarians and the people. How is the media in Greece responding to it?
Well, the media is largely controlled by the oligarchy, and so I wouldn't go so far as to say that the media is portraying the position of the government unkindly. I think it's very difficult for it to do that because the vast majority of Greeks are supportive of the government position. Sky Television just did a poll and found that 7 out of 10 Greeks are firmly in favor of the government's position and its hard negotiating stance, or relatively hard negotiating stance, with its European partners. So they're not characterizing it in an unflattering way, but I think that the people who control the media in Greece are very concerned where this is all going to head. In fact, some 8 to 10 billion euros have been withdrawn from Greek bank accounts over the last month or so in anticipation of a possible default in Brexit, which has placed very considerable stress on Greek banks. And you can be sure that a very significant part of that deposit flight, those that represent assets of the wealthier members of Greek society, the very persons who happen to control the media. But as I say, given the immense popular support for the government's position, the media is not exactly in a position to be overly critical.
Dimitri, this is a typical problem experienced by many governments that stray from the norm. For example, when Venezuela elected President Hugo Chavez and went into a crisis with the coup, one of the first things it had to do was actually stop capital flight. Is that kind of a program or discussion taking place in Greece?
It would be astonishing to me if it weren't. There's a very high level of economic competence within the Greek government. The economist, of course, who's received the greatest degree of attention is the finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, but there are many other very qualified economic academics, practitioners who form part of the cities of government. Given their level of economic sophistication, it's hard to imagine that they aren't planning for the possible eventuality of a default in a Brexit. And that could only be done in a reasonably orderly manner if there were effective capital controls put into place. But they're not going to talk about that publicly in advance of them being established, because that's just going to accelerate the deposit flight.
An article appearing on the Event Chronicle on February the 11th asks the hypothetical question, how fast would the contagion spread if Greece exits the Eurozone? Keep in mind there are two perspectives to consider with this question. The perspective of one who is addicted and attached to the current financial paradigm, who is likely to see all of this from a more fearful perspective, and there is the perspective of one who can see the bigger picture and who understands that these changes, although perhaps uncomfortable, are very necessary to root out the crimes and corruption of those who have been in control of a criminally fraudulent system of fiat currency banking. Ultimately, they are changes that will be for the greater good of all. This article writes that the rise of European anti-establishment political parties in recent years has perhaps increased the risk of a more widespread contagion to other financial systems. Deference to authority, and particularly to authority within Europe, has diminished. Official assurances of the irrevocable monetary union, except for Greece, would likely carry less weight. The fact that anti-establishment parties have generally tended to draw support from lower-skilled, older voters may further compound the problem. This economic demographic is less able to adjust their savings so as to hedge breakup risk, making physical cash the main option. And as an older age cohort, they are more likely to have savings that are vulnerable. This then adds an entirely unpredictable element to the euro area cost of a Greek exit from the euro. The direct costs can be calculated, and an intelligent approximation of the costs of increased risk can be factored in. However, if the breakup of the union expands, the direct costs expand exponentially because the costs of the Target 2 system increase and the costs of recapitalizing for the remaining members increase, and the costs of the financial system exposure increase. The transmission of fear may not be to the most obvious of candidates, of course. This is not a question of solvency or economics. If a Greek exit from the euro leads to other countries exiting, it will be the lack of plausibility of policy makers that generates the collapse. Varoufakis appears to be keenly aware of the risks involved, as we heard moments ago, and he knows that he needs to build allies in the countries around Greece. Another article by Ambrose Evans Pritchard for the London Telegraph on February 9th writes that Greece's Finance Minister Varoufakis has spelled out the negotiating strategy of the Syriza government with crystal clarity. Exit from the euro does not even enter into our plans, quite simply because the euro is fragile. It is like a house of cards. If you pull away the Greek card, they all come down, he said. Do we really want Europe to break apart? Anybody who is tempted to think it possible to amputate Greece strategically from Europe should be careful. It is very dangerous. Who would be hit after us? Portugal? What would happen to Italy when it discovers that it is impossible to stay within the austerity straitjacket? The article continues. Berkeley economist Barry Eichengreen warns that Grexit would be Lehman squared, setting off a calamitous chain reaction with worldwide consequences. Syriza's gamble is that the EU authorities know this, whatever officials may claim in public. Premier Alexis Tsipras is pushing this to the wire. Rightly or wrongly, he calculates that Greece holds the trump card, the detonation of mutual assured destruction, to borrow from Cold War parlance, and that all the threats from the European Monetary Union power centers are mere bluster. His cool nerve has caught Brussels, Frankfurt, Berlin, and the markets off guard. They assumed that this 40-year-old neophyte would back away from exorbitant demands in his landmark policy speech to the Greek parliament on Sunday night. Instead, they heard a declaration of war. He vowed to implement every measure in Syriza's pre-electoral Thessaloniki program in their entirety with no ifs and buts. This even includes a legal demand for 11 billion euro in war reparations from Germany, a full 71 years after the last Wehrmacht soldier left Greek soil. Nobody knows how this brinkmanship will end, but it is already clear that the EMU authorities have misjudged the furious determination of the Greeks. Brussels will have to go back to the drawing board and come up with a plan B. We will not roll over, said Mr. Varoufakis. The dispute is escalating to higher authorities and changing its character. Europe's leaders can no longer delegate this to technical officials. The political stakes are too high. The integrity of monetary union and the security system of the Eastern Mediterranean are both hanging from a thin Greek thread. UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage, in addressing the officially elected but less powerful governing body, the European Parliament, was pretty blunt as usual with his political colleagues.
Thank you. Well, having listened to this morning, it's clear to me there are very few people in this room who understand or dare to admit the significance of the moment that we've reached. In the wake of the historic Greek elections, there are big questions, not just about the future of the Eurozone, but actually about the future of the European project itself. There's a great game of poker that is taking place for the future of this currency. And on the one hand, we have the EU institutions. Now, however much my warnings over the years may have upset people when I said that the EU would crush and kill and destroy nation-state democracy, I think the behaviour of the key players since the Greek elections justifies everything I've said. We have the German finance minister, Mr. Schäuble, saying elections change nothing. And Mr. Juncker, who's not here today, which is disappointing. He ought to be hanging his head in shame, I guess, or perhaps he's busy getting his euros out of Greece. I've no idea. But Mr. Juncker said there can be no democratic choice against the European treaties. So there it is, folks. It doesn't matter how you vote. It doesn't matter what government you elect. These treaties are designed to be there forever, and agreements by previous governments bind parliaments that come for years and years afterwards. And what it means is that the European project is in fact the very antithesis of the democratic principle. I think these comments, frankly, are disgusting. And I guess we're all asking the question of who will blink first. On the other side, we've got this new radical left-wing Greek government, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of them until I saw last week ambling up Downing Street, Yanis Varoufakis, and there he was with his leather bomber jacket and his blue shirt hanging out at the front of his trousers, his shaven head, looking hands in pockets, looking a bit like a sort of off-duty nightclub bouncer. Now, I'm not normally a fan of Marxist academics, but having seen this fella, I suspect that perhaps he is the real deal. At least, I hope he is. Because what is at stake, it's clear from the comments we've had from Germany, from people in this chamber this morning, what is at stake is clear. Do the Greek elections mean anything? Yes or no? I hope the Greeks stand firm, whatever the consequences. If they do, the free world will applaud them.
You may have picked up Farage commenting on the fact that these treaties are prepared to be binding, regardless of any democratic vote by the people or politicians. Pay attention to that, because that is what is happening all over the world with these multinational free trade agreements. Commercial law, the system of Admiralty commercial law, is what is preparing the rules that are being given the force of law that is stripping away the rights of citizens and of countries and surrendering them to corporate and banking cabal interests. What will it take for the rest of the world to wake up and then stand up with the people of Greece? The speculation is whether the EU will recognize that Greece is holding a strong poker hand and offer debt write-offs, which could cause EU policymakers to lose face, or whether Greece will go to Russia and the BRICS alliance to seek financing that ultimately leads to a Grexit. The people seem to still be overwhelmingly in favor of the actions being undertaken by the new government, regardless of the temporary hardship it may bring. As long as their service is truly honorable to humanity and the planet, may the people of Greece and their politicians be guided and protected in their service at this time. Palestine has a new embassy in Sweden. A Press TV article has reported on February the 10th that Palestine has opened its first embassy in Western Europe in the Swedish capital city of Stockholm amid Israel's anger. According to official Swedish sources, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström attended the inauguration ceremony of the Palestinian embassy in Stockholm on Tuesday night, the 10th. As expected, reaction from Israel was harsh. The article noted that this decision is an unfortunate consequence of the mistaken policy adopted by the Swedish government. It will serve no purpose and certainly not advance us in the pursuit of negotiations, said Israel's Foreign Ministry spokesman Emmanuel Nafson. Sweden has committed greater financial aid to Palestine over the coming 5 years, although this aid comes with a few challenges related to fighting corruption, increasing gender equality, and improving respect for human rights while proceeding with the state-building process. The article adds, however, that Abbas, for his part, reassured the Swedish officials that reforms are currently underway in Palestine. Women will play a central role in our institutions on the political level and municipal contexts, within the judicial system, within security organizations, and on all other levels. We will continue to develop our institutions in order to raise women's abilities in order to achieve what our people have sacrificed so much for, the Palestinian president stated. He also called on other countries to follow the path of Sweden, which was the first European Union member state in Western Europe to recognize the Palestinian statehood. Israel had previously recalled its ambassador in protest to Sweden's initial recognition of the right to a sovereign Palestinian state. The Swedish foreign minister had also canceled a trip to Israel in January, allegedly as a result of continued criticism by Israel of Sweden. The article notes that some 135 governments have so far announced their official backing for Palestine's sovereignty. Parliaments in major European countries, including Spain, France, Britain, Ireland, and Portugal, as well as the European Parliament, have symbolically endorsed Palestine's bid to be recognized as a state. Over to financial news now. The team of journalists from 45 countries, known as the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or ICIJ, has unearthed yet another banking scandal and this one is primarily directed at the HSBC Bank. An article on their website by numerous journalists reports that secret documents reveal that global banking giant HSBC profited from doing business with arms dealers who channeled mortar bombs to child soldiers in Africa, bagmen for third world dictators, traffickers in blood diamonds, and other international outlaws. The leaked files, based on the inner workings of HSBC's Swiss private banking arm, relate to accounts holding more than $100 billion. They provide a rare glimpse inside the super-secret Swiss banking system, one the public has never seen before. The documents, obtained by the ICIJ via the French newspaper Le Monde, show the bank's dealings with clients engaged in a spectrum of illegal behavior, especially in hiding hundreds of millions of dollars from tax authorities. They also show private records of famed soccer and tennis players, cyclists, rock stars, Hollywood actors, royalty, politicians, corporate executives, and old wealth families. These disclosures shine a light on the intersection of international crime and legitimate business, and they dramatically expand what's known about potentially illegal or unethical behavior in recent years at HSBC, one of the world's largest banks. The leaked account records show some clients making trips to Geneva to withdraw large amounts of cash, sometimes in used notes. The files also document huge sums of money controlled by dealers in diamonds who are known to have operated in war zones and sold gemstones to finance insurgencies that caused untold deaths. HSBC, which is headquartered in London and has offices in 74 nations and territories on 6 continents, at first insisted that ICIJ destroy the data. Some of the key findings were noted as follows. HSBC Private Bank, Swiss or Switzerland, continued to offer services to clients who had been unfavorably named by the United Nations in court documents and in the media as connected to arms trafficking, blood diamonds, and bribery. HSBC served those close to discredited regimes, such as that of former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, former Tunisian President Ben Ali, and current Syrian ruler Bashar al-Assad. Clients who held HSBC bank accounts in Switzerland include former and current politicians from Britain, Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Kenya, Romania, India, Liechtenstein, Mexico, Lebanon, Tunisia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Paraguay, Djibouti, Senegal, Philippines, and Algeria. The bank repeatedly reassured clients that it would not disclose details of accounts to national authorities, even if evidence suggested that the accounts were undeclared to tax authorities in the client's home country. Bank employees also discussed with clients a range of measures that would ultimately allow clients to avoid paying taxes in their home countries. This included holding accounts in the name of offshore companies to avoid the European Savings Directive, a 2005 Europe-wide rule aimed at tackling tax evasion through the exchange of bank information. An article by Andre Damon, appearing on the globalresearch.ca website on February the 11th, in commenting on this story, reported that these facts have for years been in the possession of the international financial regulators and governments throughout the world, including those of Britain, France, and the U.S., which systematically covered them up. Neither the bank nor its executives nor any of the clients that utilized its tax-dodging services have been criminally prosecuted. No one should believe that HSBC is an aberration. There is no doubt that similar practices are carried out by all major international financial institutions. The HSBC files have unearthed a cesspool of corruption, criminality, bribery, and collusion that pervades the entire capitalist system and the governments that defend it. The HSBC revelations are only the latest in a series of scandals involving virtually every major financial institution. These have included the selling of fraudulent subprime mortgage-backed securities, illegal foreclosures, commodities fraud, and the manipulation of LIBOR and international foreign exchange benchmarks. It's clear that there is a very broad cross-section of elites who have been cheating the system, or to say it another way, they have been using the system as it was created for them to benefit, but for the uninformed poorer members of society to pay for. This is, again, an example of the criminally corrupt and fraudulent nature of not only the banking system, but the system of commercial law that is imposed upon people without their informed consent. Another HSBC article appears connected to this story. This is one other profession, or rather there is one other profession that seems to have attracted a bit of interest in the revelations related to this scandal. This is the profession of housewife. In this article on February 8th by Will Fitzgibbon and Martha Hamilton working with the ICIJ, they report that when accounts list a profession, and many don't, the term housewife pops up with amazing frequency, more often than such logically lucrative professions such as doctors, lawyers, and diamond dealers. It may be used to describe a wealthy married woman, but it's also applied in some cases to women who include industry pioneers, architects, journalists, teachers, princesses, and heiresses. The fact that the private bank considered, or at least described these women as housewives, could account for their high numbers among accounts where professions are listed. Housewives accounted for more than 7,300 of the clients listed by profession in HSBC's files, outweighing two other categories that suggest no paid compensation, without profession and student, together added up to fewer than 4,000. Coming back to Damon's article for a moment, Damon offers a very poignant assessment of the global system in this article, as he also writes, "For the global financial elite, the line between legitimate business activity and political donations on the one hand, and fraud, theft, and bribery on the other, does not exist. Capitalist society is run by thieves and criminals who see the law as a minor inconvenience. In the immortal words of Leona Helmsley, only the little people pay taxes." We would ask those who still believe the social order exposed by these documents can somehow be reformed. Where would you start? Would you appeal to the politicians who are all bought with political donations from financial criminals? Or to the regulatory agencies which have systematically covered up these crimes? Or the courts which bring charges against whistleblowers while shielding financial criminals? The entire structure of contemporary society, from major corporations to governments to regulators, is controlled by multi-billionaire financial oligarchs. Damon closes by stating the only way to bring to justice the major banks like HSBC and the millionaires and billionaires who used its services to commit fraud is a complete reorganization of society. The ill-gotten wealth that corrupts every public institution must be seized, major corporations must be nationalized, and every existing state replaced with a workers' government whose first task will be the establishment of democratic control over the basic forces of economic life. Such is the case that we may now be witnessing in countries like Greece, but also in Iceland. It takes the committed and unified voice of the people to turn the system upside down, to send a message to corrupted leaders that their games will no longer be tolerated. The time has now come for bankers, lawyers, judges, CEOs, and other leaders to be held accountable for the crimes they have perpetuated or covered up, and this next story is exactly an example of that. Moments ago, we heard about more revelations that are coming to the surface about how the elitists and members of the global cabal groups have been able to take advantage of an unlawful banking and legal system for their own gain, while forcing the negative aspects down upon the general populations of humanity. This has been going on, and it continues to go on, although it is being exposed more and more. CVN has reported in the past about how Iceland went through a financial crash in 2008, and the country took the unusual and generally unpopular choice to let major banks fail, and the country took steps to arrest politicians and bankers that were connected to the scandal. Although the country suffered for a few years, Iceland appears to be well on its way now to outperform almost every European country. Even if one chooses to argue the opposite, it cannot be denied that this little country has taken control of the corruption and crime that was present within the banking system. An article appearing on the IcelandMag.com website on February 12th reports that the Supreme Court of Iceland sentenced today 4 former heads of failed bank Kaupthing to jail for their role in market manipulation of share prices in Kaupthing Bank in 2008. Former CEO Reidar Mar Sigurdsson received a 5.5-year-long sentence, which is the heaviest sentence for financial fraud in Iceland's history. Former chairman Sigurdur Einarsson received a 4-year sentence. Magnus Gudmundsson, former CEO of the bank's Luxembourg branch, got 4.5 years, and so did investor Olafur Olafsson, who was a leading shareholder in the bank. The 4 men were convicted for conspiring to try to manipulate Kaupthing's share price by claiming that Sheikh Mohammed bin Khalifa Al Thani, a Qatar royal, had risked his own money by buying a 5% stake in the bank for 155 million UK pounds in September, only weeks before the bank collapsed in October of 2008. At the time of the investment, the bank's chairman, Sigurdur Einarsson, told English newspaper The Guardian that the bank's strategy of increasing the diversity of its shareholder base had proved fruitful. However, it later surfaced that it was the bank itself that was indirectly buying the shares, and now the 4 men who conceived that strategy are going to jail for a long time. Kaupthing was one of Iceland's big 3 banks that crashed in the autumn of 2008. The other 2 were Glitnir and Landsbanken. All 3 are still in winding up proceedings phase. Only the day before, on the 11th, Iceland was again revealed for the 8th consecutive year in a row to be the most peaceful country on the planet. In a separate article on the same website, it was reported that Iceland tops the list of the world's most peaceful country for the 8th consecutive year. The list is called the Global Peace Index, the GPI, and according to the Institute of Economics and Peace, which compiles this list, the world's leading measure of national peacefulness. The Global Peace Index ranks 162 nations according to their absence of violence, and is now in its 8th year, with Iceland coming first from the beginning. According to the IEP Index, it is composed of 22 indicators, ranging from a nation's level of military expenditure to its relations with neighboring countries, its low murder rate, minimal violent crimes, and the percentage of prison population. The data is sourced from a wide range of respected sources, including the International Institute of Strategic Studies, the World Bank, and various UN agencies. Both Iceland and now Greece are countries that are demonstrating through their actions that the global banking cabal can be taken on, and that their power can be diminished merely by people declaring that they no longer choose to be slaves to systems of fear, debt, and separation, and they are willing to hold leaders on all levels accountable to their actions in not representing the interests of the people or the planet. It is unclear at this time exactly what strategy is playing out in terms of the geoeconomic sphere of Europe. There are things taking place publicly, and it is a virtual guarantee that much more is going on in the background and not being revealed publicly. we're seeing some countries beginning to take steps to demonstrate that they are reclaiming their power in one sense, and then something else happens that makes one wonder the exact opposite. There are also actions taken by some countries where the purpose is not yet fully understood in terms of the bigger picture. Coming back to Sweden for a moment, the country's central bank, or Riksbank, has taken the decision this week to follow in the footsteps of Denmark and Switzerland and push its benchmark interest rate into negative territory. Jack Ewing, writing for the New York Times on February 12th, reported that the Swedish central bank on Thursday put its benchmark interest rate in negative territory and announced a bond buying program in bold moves to protect its economy from mounting economic and political uncertainty in Europe. It was the latest example of how central bankers are being pushed to their limits in efforts to stoke growth as the threat of deflation has replaced inflation as their main worry. Ewing continues, the Swedish benchmark interest rate was cut to minus 0.1%, and the central bank said it would begin buying Swedish government bonds, emulating the program used by the Federal Reserve in the United States, the Bank of England, and soon the European Central Bank to pump money into the economy and increase inflation. Sweden is a member of the European Union but is not in the Eurozone. Its economy is vulnerable to spillovers from its neighbors, forcing the central bank to react aggressively to avoid deflationary forces emanating from the rest of the continent. Central bank negative rates are intended to encourage companies and individuals to borrow more, increasing investment and consumer spending and driving up inflation. The decision means that Swedish commercial banks will be able to take out loans from the central bank at a negative interest rate. When the loans are due, banks will pay back less than they borrowed. For Sweden, as well as for Denmark and Switzerland, negative rates also help contain increases in their currencies that have been caused in part by actions of the European Central Bank. A few of the reasons for the shift in monetary policy in Sweden has been attributed to events in both Greece and Ukraine, according to the governor of Sweden's Riksbank, Stefan Ingves. In general news for the week, this past week seems to be just another week of the mainstream media putting its foot in its mouth when it comes to reporting the news. There may, however, be something going on within the media that is behind at least two slip-ups this past week. Alessandra Stanley, writing for the New York Times on February 5th, wrote that it may take 10 years to earn it, but trust in news anchors can be shaken in less than 10 minutes. And that's the hard lesson of Mr. Williams' brush with scandal for telling a tale, more than once, about being under fire in a helicopter in Iraq in 2003 that turned out not to be true. When a recent NBC News segment repeated the false version, veterans who witnessed the event complained on Facebook, and the military newspaper Stars and Stripes published an article about the fudged facts. Stanley adds that a public apology is just the first step, and Mr. Williams' mea culpa wasn't very humble. He made his fib sound like a one-time misguided effort to pay homage to veterans. Two articles by Tom Clute and Brian Stelter appearing on the CNN website sometime around February the 5th highlighted first the way Williams' story changed over the years, noting different occasions during different years when Williams commented on the event. The second article reports on the decision by NBC to suspend its lead anchor. The article writes that Tuesday night's announcement capped an extraordinary and painful 6-day period for the network. Television veterans could recall nothing quite like it. A network benching the face of its news division to penalize him for what the CEO of NBC Universal, Steve Burke, called inexcusable actions. The article continues, writing that one NBC anchor called it humiliating for this whole network. Williams was, at least until last week, the single most popular news anchor in the United States. He reached about 10 million viewers a night. Just in December, NBC signed him to a new contract. Here is how Anderson Cooper from CNN reported the story, and yes, there is a very specific reason why I am choosing his report.
Williams, he is suspended for 6 months without pay, effective immediately. Just a short time ago, just moments before we went on air, in fact, NBC News released a statement from NBC News President Deborah Turner, and it reads in part, well, on nightly news on Friday, January 30th, 2015, Brian misrepresented events which occurred while he was covering the Iraq War in 2003. The statement continues, it then became clear that on other occasions, Brian had done the same while telling that story in other venues. This was wrong and completely inappropriate for someone in Brian's position. NBC News President Deborah Turner tonight. Anchor Lester Holt will be filling in for Williams, we're told. It is unclear, though, what will happen when the 6-month suspension is up. What is clear, however, is that Williams' credibility has seen a sharp decline since the controversy erupted. Joining us now is Brian Stelter, anchor of CNN Reliable Sources, also the Hollywood Reporter's Marisa Guthrie. I appreciate both of you being with us. Brian, first of all, were you surprised by this? What's the latest you're hearing?
Marissa reported earlier today that suspension was likely, but 6 months honestly shocks me. Then again, I don't know what else NBC could have done.
It's long?
Because of how long it is and because people are automatically going to assume that he'll never come back. That 6 months is such a long period of time that this will become permanent with Lester Holt in the job. But I have to say, other than 6 months, what else could have NBC done? The talk in the hallways of the network was that he was never going to come back at all. So at least this gives him the possibility, or at least make people think there's a possibility. Steve Burt, the head of NBC Universal, met with Brian this morning at his apartment on the Upper West Side, right on Central Park West, and he says in a statement tonight, he deserves a second chance and we are rooting for him. I don't know if anyone in the country is going to believe that.
There are two important things to note here. The first is the comedic irony. You have mainstream media organizations, especially CNN, that report on the failings of one anchor, and yet the entire CNN organization, and arguably Anderson Cooper especially, have been accused of staging and faking stories, and reporting stories that are fear-mongered false flags. The irony is that CNN is not even looking at itself and its own dismal track record in reporting on Williams and NBC in their lack of integrity. The other thing to note is that if CNN is going to lengths to report on a fellow journalist's failings while ignoring its own, a question may arise as to whether or not there may be another reason behind this story. The only reason that this story perhaps became significant was because soldiers discovered the truth and called them out on it publicly. CNN has perhaps been able to sweep some of its misgivings under the rug because they were not called out publicly, but it was only members of the general public providing evidence, and therefore the public was not given the same level of credibility as perhaps someone who was in the service. A man has made a mistake, and at this point it is only one mistake, although it was perpetuated. Yet CNN has a guest commenting that he doesn't think people will trust him again. Yet who really trusts CNN anymore? The CNN story appears to be rife with hypocrisy. I might wonder why a guest would make a comment like that on the very network that is struggling with its own credibility issues. Is it possible that Williams is being scapegoated and thrown under the bus? An article by Cenk Uygur, host of the Young Turks news program, presented an interesting commentary, and I noted it because he himself came from a mainstream media background and became a whistleblower. In his article on February 9th, he writes, "People think that Brian Williams is the problem because he exaggerated a war story about Iraq? Are you kidding me? The whole war was based on a monstrous lie that almost the entire media enabled and perpetuated. That's the real problem. If the rest of the press scapegoat Williams and feign righteous indignation over his lie, as they are in the middle of doing right now, it will be unbearable. Where were all of those people when we were being sold a bill of goods on Iraq? Oh, I know, on air." And this is Cenk still speaking or writing. "They sold us those lies en masse. So please don't pretend you have integrity now. Please don't pretend that the real problem is an exaggeration about a tiny story in the middle of the war." Uygur goes on to note that this is how the system covers up for their gross failures. Every once in a while, we are offered a sacrificial lamb on a small issue that is a distraction rather than the heart of the matter. Then the media gets to walk away self-satisfied with an unbearable smug look on their face, as if they have ethics. Your ethics amuse me. Your full concern over this issue is vomitous. There is another story behind this one. I feel this. I do not know exactly what, but one possibility is that Williams was intending to break a story or perhaps expose something, and this was the Zionist media machine of discrediting the anchor so that whatever he may try to share in the future, no one will believe him. Is it possible that this lie told by Williams was given to him back in the early days by his handlers so that they would have something or some dirt on him in the future if he ever tried to backstab his cabal bosses? In another media story, on February 9th, RT and numerous other media and alternative media were quick to jump all over what has been called a Freudian slip by numerous sources at the expense of U.S. media network CNN. Surprise, surprise. RT reported that social media is abuzz after CNN labeled Ukrainian forces involved in Kiev's deadly military operation in the country's southeast as pro-U.S. troops. Online comments are calling it a Freudian slip, claiming it unmasks the true agenda behind the conflict. The headline during CNN's Monday segment, dedicated to talks between Barack Obama and German Chancellor Angela Merkel on the resolution of the Ukraine crisis, and the banner read, "Obama considers arming pro-U.S. troops." The article continues, CNN's blunder was immediately noticed by viewers, many of whom began sharing the screenshot on Twitter, calling it a Freudian slip and commenting that the mask slips. One person said it was the stupidest thing I've seen today. The definition of Kiev forces as pro-U.S. troops looks to be a perfect contrast to the term pro-Russian rebels, which is used by Western media to refer to the militias in Ukraine's southeastern Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Western media outlets claim the regions are receiving direct support from Russia. RT also reports that Moscow has repeatedly stated that it is not part of the Ukraine conflict. Meanwhile, the U.S. and EU have been unable to back their accusations that Russia is supporting and arming the rebels. Last week, Stephen Cohen, Professor Emeritus of Russian Studies and Politics at New York University and Princeton University, called the Ukraine conflict a proxy war between Russia and the U.S.-led NATO bloc. A political dispute in Ukraine has become a Ukrainian civil war. Russia backed one side, the United States and NATO the other. So it's not only a new Cold War, it's a proxy war, Cohen told Russia Insider. So the U.S. and the Western countries are able to justify their arming of Ukrainian forces because they control the mainstream media that perpetuates the stories that Russia is allegedly arming the pro-rebel troops in eastern Ukraine, which the West has not yet been able to prove, as mentioned moments ago. Historically, this might have been a very difficult situation for any country that is facing the wrath of the global banking cabal. Most countries would have buckled under the pressure because they did not have the ability to defend itself on any front against this cabal-controlled group. Even if the U.S. arms Ukraine troops, Russia is unable to do so because the Western media would report it as proof for why their weapons were now necessary instead of vice versa. Therefore, are there any cards that Russia could play? This week, there has been some speculation that one card could be played, a card that could potentially shatter the whole war games illusion that has been going on since 9/11. Gordon Duff of Veterans Today reported receiving on February 10th a story from the Russian news agency Pravda, dated February 7th, that suggested that Russian President Putin is preparing to release satellite images that will allegedly prove that the World Trade Center towers were brought down in a controlled demolition using special weapons. While the sleeping world continues to buy the Western rhetoric regarding Ukraine, the awake members of humanity are waiting to observe what kind of response may come from Russia. Duff offered the roughly translated article in his story, and this Pravda article writes that Putin is going to hit once, but he's going to hit hard. Russia is preparing the release of evidence of the involvement of the U.S. government and intelligence services in the September 11th attacks. The list of evidence includes satellite images. Published material can prove the U.S. government complicity in the 9/11 attacks and the successful manipulation of public opinion. The attack was planned by the U.S. government, but exercised using her proxy so that an attack on America and the people of the United States looked like an act of aggression by international terrorist organizations. The evidence will be so convincing that it utterly debunks the official 9/11 cover stories supported by the U.S. government. Russia proves that America is no stranger to using false flag terrorism against its citizens in order to achieve a pretext for military intervention in a foreign country. In the case of the September 11th attacks, the evidence will be conclusive satellite imagery. If successful, the consequences of Putin's tactics would expose the U.S. government's secret terrorist policies. The government's credibility will be undermined and should bring about mass protests in the cities, leading to an uprising, according to American analysts. In the game of chess, it is about knowing when to play along with an opponent, while positioning the pieces into their respective places to set up the final move that will be checkmate. The collapse of the 9/11 illusion would represent a significant blow to the credibility of Western leaders whose military agendas have been dependent upon the people buying into the fear of some illusory foreign terror agenda, when in fact the terror agenda was coming from within the borders of the U.S. as well as from within the U.S. government and the Western governments that have been complicit in the crimes against its own citizens and against humanity in perpetuating this one grand lie. Taking a look at some technology news for the week now, it is slowly becoming apparent to people in the Western world that some Asian countries, and China in particular, are not exactly what they are reported as being in the Western media. The Western media seems to hype only the challenges faced by countries like China and their alleged addiction to coal and petroleum-based energies, giving the impression that the country is not progressive at all. It could be argued that the opposite is true. Although they may have been historically dependent upon these fuels, one cannot accuse China of ignoring the new technologies that are present in the world. China already has, for example, a high-speed rail network, some of which is based on magnetic levitation technologies, which puts North American rail transportation back into the Stone Age by comparison. Hanergy Holdings, one Chinese company that is making rapid expansion into the energy sector with its thin-film solar, hydropower, wind power, and energy conservation and emission reduction businesses, is now getting set to enter the automotive industry. Yue Wang, in an article for Forbes magazine on February the 2nd, writes that Hanergy will launch 5 models of solar-powered cars in October, according to a February 2nd post on the company's website. The models can run up to 100 kilometers after 4 hours of charging, according to the statement. Hanergy is working with 3 foreign partners and 2 domestic firms to develop solar-powered vehicles, the firm says in the statement. The market potential is huge. The company is also partnering with Tesla Motors in building a supercharger network. Hanergy, in April, delivered 2 photovoltaic charging stations for the Palo Alto, California-based electric car firm, as Elon Musk continues to invest in charging stations in China. The Chinese must be recognizing the revolution that is coming, as the article notes at least 3 other companies that are also seeking to expand their businesses into the electric car industry. Musk is moving strongly forward on his agenda to promote alternative sources of fuel and power, The word this week is that he is set to introduce another potential game changer in terms of energy provision. In a separate but related article appearing on the Time.com website by Victor Luckerson on February 12th, Luckerson writes that Tesla's next innovation could take you off the electric grid. The tiny car manufacturer is planning to unveil a new lithium-ion battery pack that homeowners could buy to store and supply their own energy, CEO Elon Musk said during an earnings call on Wednesday. We have the design done, and it should start going into production in about 6 months or so, said Musk. In addition to selling to residential customers, Tesla could also sell batteries to utilities trying to increase energy efficiency. Tesla's chief technology officer said the company was talking to almost all the utilities currently experimenting with battery storage technology. When hearing stories like the one you just heard of the new technologies that seem to be coming out one after the other, one may be inclined to wonder two things. One, what else is coming out that we have not yet heard about? And two, what has changed to allow so much futuristic technology to start coming out so quickly? These are perhaps indeed the key questions, and both have their own unique challenges in terms of a response. The whole global paradigm is shifting, and this is becoming more obviously clear, even to those who were not able to see it previously. Changes are happening across almost all sectors, and crimes are being exposed on almost all levels. As the cabal loses more and more power, it seems that the people gain more and more of a foothold into their societies again, and those who may have been sitting on certain technologies for a long time may now have the freedom to begin getting it to market almost immediately. As far as what lies ahead, well, that is an area for the dreamers. There are over 6,000 patents of technologies that have been kept hidden from humanity that could help our planet. Since we don't know what we don't know, we will have to hang on a bit longer to see what new and exciting things are going to keep coming out. If the release of technologies continues at its current rate, the year 2015 could be set to mark the complete transformation of our global society as we currently know it. This will, however, also depend upon how much humanity is willing to demand it, and also how much humanity is prepared to oversee it so that it cannot be abused or used for harm. For now, we can still dream, but there are some technologies that are coming out that many are not yet aware of. One technology article prepared by Renee Kirsten Cohort for the Spirit Science website offers 10 futuristic technologies that are set for release. Cohort offers 10 technologies that she feels are in the process of being introduced to the world. She writes, in terms of number 10, artificial intelligence. With technology assistance, we can speed up our work and research. Her number 9, hypersonic trains, which are faster than planes. Her number 8, wearable computers, just like Google Glass, but more interactive with virtual reality displays to educate you about your world. Her number 7, advanced 3D printing. From manufacturing car parts to 3D printing food, it's only a matter of time before the whole industrial industry changes. Her 6, lab-grown organs. In the near future, we should be able to grow 100% compatible organs from a person's own DNA. No more need for organ donation. Her number 5, super immersive gaming. Virtual realities and experiencing the video game world is the entertainment and training tools of the future. Her number 4, bionic limbs. Technology for bionic arms that you can control with your own neurological system have been created. In the next few decades, scientists believe that they will make limbs that look real. Number 3, driverless cars. Could driving in the near future be left to robots while humans enjoy a leisurely movie? Number 2, holographic technology. So far, holograms require mirrors to display. Scientists are working to create specialized projectors that display real holograms in the near future. And her number one, eternal life. Many different technologies are emerging that will allow the wealthy to live very long, healthy lives. Is this a technology that will be distributed to the masses or further divide the 1% from the rest of society? And she asks, what about overpopulation? As long as the global cabal is still attempting to control and dominate the planet, there will always be moral and ethical issues attached to so many of the new technologies. If the cabal media promotes something as threatening, many will buy into that and refuse certain technology. This, by the way, is a manufactured form of consent that the cabal uses against humanity. When a time comes later on that a technology is revealed to be beneficial, people may ask why this wasn't released sooner. The argument will be that it was always there, but the people didn't want it. How many ways can you identify in your world where you may be giving away your power and your consent just by making small decisions that you may think or feel are meaningless in any one moment of now? Looking at health news now, it is something that most people either knew or generally accepted as truth, even though it has never been thoroughly exposed publicly. That is, until now. RT reported on February 12th that British public health experts issuing guidance on obesity receive hundreds of thousands of pounds from the sugar industry, an investigation has found. Funding from companies including Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Nestle have flowed into scientific research bodies such as the UK's Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, the SACN, and the Medical Research Council, the MRC, for over a decade. Scientists whose work was at least partly funded and sometimes fully funded by the sugar industry include Professor Susan Jebb, the government's obesity czar. Leading scientists blame the government's funding cuts for forcing researchers into the arms of big sugar, while one doctor told RT the findings were disturbing. The report comes at a time when medical experts say daily guidelines on sugar intake are misleading, with the average Briton consuming 2 to 3 times the World Health Organization's recommended limit. Other scientists received consultancy fees from Boots, Coca-Cola, Mars, Cereal Partners UK, and Unilever. They also sat on advisory boards for Coca-Cola, the Food and Drink Federation, and the Institute of Grocery Distributors, the report claims. The article later quotes Dr. Asim Malhotra, a cardiologist and science director at the Medically Led Action on Sugar, as saying the findings were disturbing. According to Malhotra, I think it's quite disturbing. I think the public would be appalled that the people advising them on what they eat are receiving money from the food industry. We know that biased funding for research is one of the root causes of problems within healthcare at the moment, whether it's food industry funding or pharmaceutical funding. The labeling of sugar remains extremely misleading. The guidelines' daily amount doesn't distinguish between added sugars and what's intrinsic to the product. A former chair of the UK SACN, Alan Jackson, also feels that government cutbacks are a reason for why researchers have turned to industry funding. He was quoted as saying that by the very nature of its complex roots and wide interdisciplinary engagement, nutrition has particular vulnerabilities in this regard, but it is by no means unique to nutrition. The statement seems to imply that just because others are doing it, it must be okay for the nutrition industry to also do it. And this is to accept funding from sources that offer products and services completely opposite to that which they are claiming to support. As we just heard, even the food and nutrition industries have become corrupted by cabal-controlled interests to keep people in various states of ill health in order to support other cabal-controlled industries such as Big Pharma and Big Medicine. CVN recently reported on doctors who are misdiagnosing cancer, for example, in order to sell cancer treatments for more money. For the ethical doctor, the one who truly wishes to honor one's oath to do no harm, and who also sees the value in holistic nutrition as a foundation for good health, what is one to do? It seems one doctor has come up with a solution. An article by Nick Mayer on January 29th on the Alt Health Works website has reported on a doctor who apparently sold his practice to buy an organic farm, and that he has begun treating patients himself. The article writes the following: deaths from correctly taken prescription drugs number above 100,000 every year, which is just one of the main reasons why the popularity of natural medicine has surged lately. The classic pills, surgery, and vaccines method that most doctors utilize first and foremost hasn't changed a whole lot, but some individual doctors have adjusted and begun putting more stock in natural methods again. One particular doctor on the East Coast of the U.S. has done the previously unthinkable. He's spending less time in his New York office and more time reconnecting with the roots of what it means to be healthy. Mayer shares the story of Dr. Robert Weiss and his pharmacy with a letter F. Mayer writes that Weiss has officially started the state of New Jersey's first farm-based medical practice 55 miles away from his New York office, where he owns a 348-acre, 18th century style farm in Long Valley. Plant-based foods are the most powerful disease-modifying tools available to practitioners, more powerful than any drugs or surgeries. Weiss does note that his treatments cannot fix broken bones or physical ailments simply using plant-based health tinctures, but in many cases, healthy nutrition and holistic medicine can be the prevention that makes bodies stronger, and these may prevent some physical ailments from manifesting. According to Mayer, Weiss also launched Ethos Health, and there is a Facebook page for this, a community-supported agriculture product. A total of 90 families have paid membership fees and volunteered to pick crops and weeds, thus far enjoying fresh organic fruits, vegetables, and herbs from Weiss's 2 farmers. Human health is directly related to the health of the environment, the production of food, and how it is grown, said Weiss to another news site, NJ.com. I see this farm as an opportunity for me to take all the biology and chemistry of plants I have studied and link them to the human biological system. The article also tells the story of one client, Angie Rotella Suarez, whose mother was apparently saved by the health recommendations of a plant-based diet made by Weiss. The mother was able to stop taking blood pressure medication after 2 weeks when she was given this diet, and she was able to leave her wheelchair and begin doing chores around the house with her newfound energy and purpose in living. According to Suarez, Weiss is the best of what the medical profession has to offer. As more doctors step into the true service of health as it relates to their oath to do no harm, more will instinctively begin to serve from a position of identifying the root energetic causes of illness and focus on treating those as opposed to more reactionary and profit-based treatments that more often than not are being exposed as more harmful than helpful. And in this week's final words. Last week, I offered a perspective on a term called life capitalized, this ever-evolving process encompassing the all that is, the physical, the non-physical, the visible and the invisible, that support and sustain the presence of everything on and beyond Earth. From this point, I will simply use the word life, but it will mean the capitalized definition. I noted that everything is energy, and that the major aspects of life that most are familiar with, humans, animals, and natural plantation, share a high percentage of water in terms of physical composition. We are here to discover and remember who we are, and this has been done through a long history of events of being who we are not. It could be argued that we, as a species, will not be able to know or experience peace until humanity is able to individually, but on a mass scale, begin to see and understand not only one's individual relation to oneself, but also to life with its infinite aspects of oneness. The individual must then choose to serve life in all its aspects from the uniquely different and equally beautiful perspective that each human incarnated to experience and create. In other words, even though our global structures have created criteria of separation among humans for the purposes of slavery and control, it is how we choose to awaken and create differently, using our differences not for collective fear and separation, but in unity of service to life for the highest good of all. Everyone claims to want to experience peace. As we are learning, however, peace appears to have many different definitions, and the definitions appear to be dependent upon how one is perceiving life, based on one's race, religion, culture, gender, orientation, language, etc., etc., etc. It is also dependent upon one's relation to life, how one has been conditioned to think about those races, religions, cultures, genders, orientations, and languages, of all the other aspects of life surrounding that one individual in that one moment of now. Peace, as I have mentioned before, is a word that lacks a true, broadly accepted, holistic definition. I believe I am beginning to understand why. Peace, as I choose to experience and be it, will be uniquely different, yet equally beautiful to a peace as a chosen experience or being shared by every other aspect of life, human or otherwise. Peace, I offer to you now, becomes not a definition of something tangible or even conditional, but rather it becomes a relation to life. One's experience of peace will change from day to day, moment to moment, depending upon the relation one chooses to have with all aspects of life in every moment of now. If one is not being loving, the experience of peace for that one will be different. If it will not be any more right or wrong than another's experience, but it will be an experience that allows one to grow if one chooses to do so. What if humanity could bring together our collective energies and send forth an energy that could raise and potentially transform the vibratory frequencies of all aspects of life in a singular moment of now? In many Western countries, February 14th is recognized as Valentine's Day. It is more commonly associated with the energy that is love. Love is an energy that Dr. Emoto has shown to have a positive influence on water. What if, for example, on a day that is recognized and celebrated as a day of love, could become a wave of frequency upliftment for the human collective and planetary consciousness? What if this energy empowered soldiers worldwide to lay down their arms or walk away from their drone guidance systems? As Iraq veteran Mike Prisner has said, while weapons are created and owned by this government, and he was referring to the U.S. government, they are harmless without people willing to use them. What if we could influence the manifestation of such a reality? Neil Donald Walsh, in his book, Tomorrow's God, wrote, "So long as you believe in a two-faced God, you will create ecstasy and terror side by side. You have imagined a God who is the epitome of both, and by telling yourself that you are created in the image and likeness of God, you have given yourself the moral authority to demonstrate both. You love and hate in the name of God. Walsh also wrote that until you can see God in the face of your enemy, you cannot see God at all, for in truth there is no such thing as an enemy. There is only the aspect that is you, living in contrast to another aspect of you. God does not exist for you if he exists for you only in people and things you like. God is not real for you if she is experienced by you only in those things with which you agree. A true, holistic, global, and galactic peace has not been possible until now. Are you one who is willing to know it, be it, and experience it? What would you do if you woke the next morning to find it had manifested? What would you do if you awoke to find that it had not? To those who consistently say, "I told you so," or "See, I knew it wouldn't happen," or some other kind of similar comment, I put this question to you. What have you done lately to demonstrate or be peace in the world? When was the last time you put yourself on the line by taking a risk in declaring something? Are the complaints one is making about things not manifesting an example of being peace in this world? It could perhaps be argued that the reason it didn't manifest was because of the complainers and doubters. Those who are saying that something is impossible are gently requested to remain silent and stand aside for those who are making it possible. There are several quotations made by others worth considering. From this unknown source, a different world will not be created by indifferent people. From Rosemary Fillmore, the world we are experiencing today is the result of our collective consciousness, and if we want a new world, each of us must start taking responsibility for helping to create it. From William Hutchinson Murray, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, the providence moves also. A whole team of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance, which no one could have dreamt would have come one's way. I have been as guilty as all of you in playing it safe and not firmly committing to something that has the potential to change the world. At the same time, however, I have firmly committed myself to this newscast and this service. If something does not manifest, is it because one chose not to fully commit to it? Was there something one did not do? Was it something that perhaps one was not supposed to participate with in that moment of now because of a soul growth experience and lesson needed in some other future moment? One will never know, while in purely 3D vibration, what one's purpose or truth is. As one awakens, learns, and grows, the vibration of one shifts, and the individual is no longer fully in a 3D level of vibration and perhaps open to higher revelations. There is perhaps a quantum scientific argument that could now be made. If one has chosen not to believe peace is possible, or if one has chosen not to do something to help bring peace into reality, has this one jumped into a potential timeline where the possibility of no peace exists, and has left a timeline behind where the reality of peace manifested? I am certain that last paragraph will blow the brainstems of more than a few people, so I'll just leave it at that. Leaders, politicians, diplomats, researchers, teachers, and institutions have attempted to define peace, which is hypocritical, since everything they depend upon has come as a result of the exact opposite, a state of peacelessness in the world. If there was a way to define the word peace, I choose to create it this way and propose it as follows. Peace is an internal experience of unconditional love and service to life, relative to one's uniquely different, equally beautiful connection and relation to life in each moment of now. It comes down to this: what have you got to lose by committing yourself to the manifestation of an experience of global peace? If one considers the worst-case scenario, that it does not manifest, what has one really lost? You have gained the gift of giving yourself practice in manifesting, merely by believing in yourself and believing that the experience of it is possible. If it has not manifested, then one could reflect on one's true commitment to peace and one's deep inner knowing of who one is through the experience of what was not manifested in that moment, and use that for personal growth or to lead by example to those around that one individual. What are you ready and willing to choose in this moment of now? Where does peace begin? It can only begin with you. When does peace begin? It begins the moment you choose to have a paradigm-shifting relation with life in this current moment of now. Be peace and create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So that is the unfolding consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is a part of the InLight Universal group of programs. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary on the blog at cosmicvisionnews.com, on the CVN Facebook, Scene, FaceUni, and LO pages, and also on YouTube, Google+, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that it is the same boiling water that softens the potato that also hardens the egg. It is not about the situation, but rather what one is made of, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your heart, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosures unfolding all around you. Namaste.